A visionary, leader of faith, and advocate for education and equality, Dr. William Hooper Councill's footprint embedded in the very history of Huntsville. Our Kenesha Dees takes us on a journey from Councill's rise from slavery to legacy.
I walk 3 miles 3 times a week for lessons a week in physics and chemistry and pay to learn professor 50 cents for each lesson. God forbid that anybody, white or black, should ever be forced to battle against such odds.
Those words from Dr. William Hooper Councill, echoed by the writer of his first ever biography. Author and Alabama A&M University alumnus Eddie Davis Jr. shares the passion of Councill's first love, striving toward educational excellence.
He was the first ex-slave to found and become president of a college in America. And as a boy, he was literally sold on the auction block here on these grounds.
The very ground that would later become Alabama A&M University, founded in 1875.
I really was able to, really witness the sacrifices that he made to provide an education for descendants of slaves and freedmen.
Councill was born on July 12, 1848 in Fayetteville, North Carolina on Councill Plantation, and was one of 4 sons. He was purchased by a Huntsville slave owner, Judge D.C. Humphreys. Councill and his mother and brother fled north, and Councill returned to Alabama after the Civil War in 1865. Councill later learned at a Quaker school in Jackson County and became a teacher at the county school system in 1868. His passion to establish an institution for higher learning was followed by his establishment of St. John AME Church in 1885.
African Methodism was very influential in the South, and he loved the African Methodist Episcopal philosophy because it was based in African culture. The actual first service for St. John was held in a barber shop, which was located on West Miller and Holmes Street.
Huntsville historian William Hampton says Councill was a civil rights pioneer in his own right by purchasing a first-class train ticket during the Jim Crow era.
He was asked to remove himself from a first-class section. Dr. Councill did not do so and was forcibly removed from that first-class section, and he sued the interstate commerce.
His namesake further carried on in education with the opening of Huntsville's first public African-American school in 1892, William Hooper Councill High School. The school closed in 1966 due to integration. Last October, the city opened William Hooper Councill High School Park and later unveiled his statue in December. James Donaldson, one of the school's former students, taking a walk down memory lane, says he feels joy.
I remember when the park first opened and I was able to walk through, I was very excited that we had this memorial.
Councill died on April 9, 1909. He's buried with his wife, Maria H. Councill, on the campus of Alabama A&M University. His legacy still lives on.
Think about Huntsville and education. That statue, to me, it solidifies the impact Dr. Councill made, regardless of ethnicity, in Huntsville. And he solidified his stamp when it comes to educational excellence.
Putting the Valley first, Kenesha Dees, WZDX News.
Councill's legacy definitely still lives on. Alabama A&M University was recently awarded a $135,000 grant from Microsoft to support cybersecurity applications. And St. John AME is planning to move to a new location. The groundbreaking is scheduled for February 14th.